This is my third and final tour in Vietnam. It lasted 9 months. Uh, Honestly, when I got down there, I was finally given permission to leave, and I went home on 30 days leave, and then I came back, and I was informed by Captain Peterson that I would be the new platoon leader. I didn't want the job, and I told him, and he told me it wasn't a request, it was an order, not that politely. So I went ahead and did it. It turned out to be an off and on job. Whenever somebody was taken out, a sergeant was taken out of the infantry to go home, they'd give him like a week or two off, and then he would take my job over. And when he left, I would start it up again. Although they really didn't do anything. I kept the job, but then they had the title. Yeah. Another thing was we became restricted to our company area because an aircraft crashed coming in one night, and we were all at a enlisted man's club watching movies. They showed movies in there, and we'd never got them up north. And so all the people that normally that would have taken care of the aircraft on the ground and rig it for extraction were at the club. So officers had to do all those jobs. So you had captains and lieutenants flying aircraft, and some lieutenants and a lot of warrant officers were on the ground with rifles like infantry, and the maintenance officer, I believe, had to rig the helicopter for extraction. And the next day, we were informed that we couldn't leave the company area at all unless you're going on sick call, or you could leave if you had somebody to take your place. Just as simple as that. So we were restricted there for the next 9 months, or I was. It was a different day. It was a lot of rice paddies and jungle, no real hills. There were a lot of hills up north. Just one big hill, Nui Ba Dien, the Black Virgin, and we controlled the bottom of it, the land around it, and the very top there was a microwave relay station run by the Signal Corps, and everything in between belonged to the NVA Army. They tried to take it, drive them off a couple times, but they couldn't do it. It was a scary place to land. We'd land on top to, bring them in or supplies, and everybody had to stay with the aircraft right near it. You couldn't shut it off. There always had to be a pilot in the seat, buckled in and ready to take off at a moment's notice. They got a lot of small arms fire and rocket RPG fire. So I didn't really like going up there. Our job changed. We didn't do sniffer missions anymore. We didn't do I don't remember what I called it. Snatch missions, where we picked up Vietnamese for interrogation. We worked a lot with LRPs, inserting them and taking them out when they were in contact. There were a lot of night extraction. They were terrible. Captain Peterson would, call me over to his quarters and, just tell me it was going to be a, LRPs in contact. He'd tell me if it was a red or a green LZ. Red is hot and you could return fire. Green is no fire at all, even if they were shooting at us. I remember one it was a red LZ we couldn't shoot, and we flew over it for a long, long time till we were almost out of fuel. And I remember hearing this one Hispanic kid on the radios, and he was begging for us to come in and get him. There were two teams actually. I don't know if anybody picked up the second team, but I never heard anybody that desperate in my life. And I hope we got out. We got the other team out, and they didn't call us back. Silly things, funny things happened. We had we called it piss tubes. It was a barrel put in the ground with a screen over it, and you could urinate into it, and that was our urinals. And one of our scout officers got called out on an emergency mission, and he jumped across the road, and a perfect shot in the hole. He went about, I'd say, mid-thigh deep in a barrel of piss. And he had to go out and fly that mission still. I thought it was funny. He didn't. It's a unit like that. There were almost as many officers as enlisted men, and we all pretty much got along together. There wasn't a lot of, how am I saying? There wasn't a lot of saluting, or I guess military manners. You could use slang when you talked to them. You didn't always have to address them as sir or mister. You did. I did, but a lot of guys didn't. And they seemed to accept it. They didn't seem offended by it. They were a lot of really good officers in that unit. Our commanding officer wasn't when we first got down there. He took a helicopter to go to Saigon, where he picked up a hooker, and he flew her back to our base and installed her in his quarters for the night. Well, we got rocket mortars that night, and instead of rushing to take immediate command of the unit, he made sure his friend was put away safely so she wouldn't get hurt. Then he took over command of the unit, which went over like a lead balloon with the rest of the officers, and they actually wrote to the division commander and just told him what happened. And he was relieved of duty. He was, in his official records, it was noted, what had happened. There was no court-martial or anything. He was just informed that he could resign whenever he wanted to. He would never get promoted again. He was going to be a major forever. He had, his career was through. Then we got a new commander, and I never remember the names. They weren't important to me. I never remember the first sergeant's names. The last one we had hated my guts. I was the youngest platoon sergeant in the unit. All the rest were in their late 20s, or anywhere up to maybe 40 years old. And there I am, a 21-year-old kid, and they kept trying to pull all kinds of shit on me, but they seemed to catch it. They wanted more men for KP, and they told me that I was going to have to start turning over all my door gunners and crew chiefs and put them on the list, and that they would, they'd have to pull KP like everybody else. And I said, well, we're on constant standby. We only have a crew chief and a gunner for each aircraft. If you take anybody away from me, I'm in a problem. So through giving me his lecture, I told him, I said, yes, I'll have these men for you in the morning. He said, and is there anything else? He said, and I said, yeah, I need to borrow a couple men to, crew these aircraft. And he said, well, he got mad again. He's always mad. And he said, forget it. He said, I felt that was part of my job to keep them off KP, and I did. And let's see, Lurps, God, those guys are nuts. We picked up, I don't remember much of it. We picked him up, and we went in. It was a red LZ, but we could go in firing, but there wasn't anybody around. They were through with their mission. So we landed and picked him up, and we received all kinds of fire coming out. And it scared the shit out of me, so I just opened up with my M60 machine gun, and I burned a barrel out. But they hit our aircraft. They had hit it in the tail, and the guy stepped out of the jungle with probably an M16, I think. And he was walking around, readjusting his aim. And the last round hit about 18 inches from me, went through an engine oil cooling fan. And then I shot him and ended his day. But we had our engine temperature went up. They were flying low level all the way into Tain. We had to do a running, I don't know why though. We did a running landing. We had a tail rotor. Maybe the pilots just wanted to do it. They had their own way of doing things. But we had to make a running landing like an airplane, slide across the airstrip. It was metal. They put metal airstrips down whenever they could. And, light off our Lurps, and we went one way, and they had their own thing to do. They went the other way. We got a new infantryman in. He'd been in Vietnam quite a while. You can always tell by their uniforms. They're faded and stained, clean, but faded and stained. And I was talking to him, and why are you like that? I could see you got a sergeant. You had sergeant stripes on there. And he said, well, I was. I can't remember what it was. We had some. His unit had a celebration, and as a joke, he threw a hand grenade into the latrine while there were guys in there. Nobody got hurt bad, but he lost 3 stripes. He went from sergeant to private. And they pulled him out of his unit and gave him to us. We got the weirdos. He had another guy that had been kicked out because he wasn't a very good radio man, and he'd done something else in his unit before. And he tried to fix our radios when they didn't need it, and then I had to call maintenance in to repair them. We had another gunner that was been on the go-go birds. They were the Chinook helicopters. In Vietnam, some of them were armed as gunships because they were the fastest helicopters we had. They were huge. And he'd been a gunner on one of them. And we had an artilleryman that came in for a door gunner. The weapon the gun he was on, I think it was a 1.5. I know it was a 1.55. The powder charge was wet when he put it in there, so the shell didn't leave the gun. So he put another shell in it, and he put in the powder charge and fired it and destroyed the gun. Luckily, nobody was injured. It blew the breech off. But they sent him to us. Most of them were good, though. They did their jobs, but I always seemed to get the wackos. I was the only normal one there, I think. And I did use my rank. I used it to, not my rank, but my position to get out of flying missions if I didn't want to. I traded off with one guy. I don't remember why, though. But I took his mission was just to ash and trash. We would go to squadron headquarters and pick up mail and parts, replacement people, just whatever had to be picked up, we did it. It was a really easy run. So and I'd been drinking, so I wasn't drunk, but when I drink, I can go to sleep real quick. So I just got in the aircraft and we took off, and I just dropped my like sunglass shield in front of my eyes and leaned back and went to sleep. And I woke up in the middle of a fight. And I don't know where we were, what we were doing, but we weren't wanted there by the NBA. And that's when I slowed down my drinking, when I knew I'd have to fly. I remember a mission we had to take some people somewhere. They had to get there soon, so we were volunteered. So we dropped them off. We picked them up, and part way there, we got an emergency call. Somebody got wounded or something. I don't remember what it was exactly. But we just landed next to an artillery fire base and kicked them off. It might have been a medevac, because we went in and we weren't a medevac unit, but we would do medevacs. And so they didn't like it. A fire base was usually an artillery battery surrounded by an infantry company with some barbed wire around them and some bunkers, and it's just a scary place to be, especially if most of these guys were rear echelon people that didn't actually do any combat. So after we pulled the guy out, put him in the took him to the hospital, and then I don't know. I don't know where we went, but those guys, I don't know, they left him there on that fire base, I guess. And a lot of guys, a lot of good door gunners, but they all wanted to get more air medals. Because every 25 hours of combat time, I believe you got a bronze star on your deck, the air medal ribbon. And after, when you hit 100 hours, you got a silver one. Take the bronze away and put a silver one on. And it went like that. If you get another 100 hours, you'd get another silver medal or a little silver star. And so they all wanted to get more, on their uniform. But we never wore Class A uniforms. We just wore jungle fatigues. Then they come up with Nomax flight suits. We got those. They're like Nomax is what a race car driver wears, and it was to protect us if you get shot down and we burned. And then they found out that if you were wearing anything underneath them, like some guys wore underwear under them, and some guys actually wore their fatigues under them, they would burn. They would catch fire underneath the Nomax. So there were some guys badly injured that way. So had to make sure you didn't have any clothing underneath. We had Nomax flight gloves, and although when a helicopter burns, it burns fast, and I really didn't see it would do any good. And then towards the end of my tour, they came out with earplugs. They decided that flying at altitude and then dropping down low and all the machine gun fire and explosions was bad for your hearing. So they issued us earplugs. I'd already been flying probably close to a year. I had all the damage I was going to get, I guess. One of my crew chiefs got sent home, or rotated out, and they sent in a new one, and he was the same rank as I was. I'm a photographer, and he was a maintenance man. And one of the first things he asked me, should have sent a red flag up, was what was my date of rank. When you were promoted to this rank, and he found out that he outranked me. So he went to my company commander and told him that, or my platoon leader, and told him that he was ready to take over the platoon for me. And Captain Peterson told him to take a hike. He said, you don't know anything yet. And he took it personally, and he blamed me for it. And I had a hell of a time getting him to get up in the morning. I said, we have to get up. We have to be up and ready to go when the first aircraft leave, which is first light. We've got to be on the aircraft. We go out there, we put all our weapons on it, make sure it's ready to fly, and then we go get breakfast. And then we come back and we sit and wait, till something happens. And he could not get that through his head, or he didn't want to get it through his head. So we had a couple of run-ins. And finally, one morning, I woke him up, and he said, I'll get up in a few minutes when I'm ready. And I pulled a gun on him and said, get up or I'll blow your head off. And he threw the sheet back. And he had a gun of his own pointed at me, kind of a Mexican standoff. So I just told my platoon leader, I said, I can't do anything with him. He says, he outranks me, and he won't listen to me. And I gave up on him. I don't know what they did with him. He stayed with us, but everybody is responsible for everybody else. Everybody depends on everybody doing their job. And he just wouldn't go with the program. It's not if you like being there or not. It's somebody depends on you. You've got to be there for them. I've been in spots where I needed help, and somebody was always there for me. One night we were playing poker, And Captain Peterson called me back, and had a few beers, and I really had to take a leak, and I had to go to talk to him first, and he said it was lerps in contact again, and he always told me, get me a volunteer crew chief and get me a volunteer door gunner. Well, I asked for the volunteer crew chief, but I couldn't even ask for a door. I always flew those missions, the night missions. I didn't want to, but I couldn't ask or order anybody to do it. I just couldn't. So I never got a chance to take a leak. I just went out to the aircraft. And we went out and we flew over them until the warning lights came on for fuel. And we had to leave. And we landed in a refueling station. We called them POLs. Petroleum, Oil, and Lubricants is what it stood for. And it probably looked funny if you could see it today. It's one man has to stay in the aircraft, one pilot, while we're refueling. And everybody had to go to the bathroom, and the crew chief jumped out and started refueling and unbuttoned his pants and was peed by the helicopter. And I was standing by the pilot that stayed on. I opened his door, and I'm standing there peeing. And the pilot's standing in front of the aircraft, and he's peeing. And I still got my helmet on, my flight helmet. And the pilot says, "Tell Captain Peterson to hurry up. I got to piss too." It would be funny today. It wasn't funny. Well, it was funny then. I didn't care if he had to pee or not. And we went back out there, and they were whispering. They were all around them. And so we were waiting till they went a little past them, and then they made up a plan. We would come in and hover over them. They had it was a strobe light, but it could only be seen from the air. It was just a light on top. And they said, "Put your strobe on, and we're going to come down to it. And when we're 15 feet off the ground, throw a flare behind it." We had like trip flares or magnesium flares, huge bright lights. He said, "Throw it behind us, the aircraft, so it lights up in front. We can see where to land." And well, radios, sometimes it isn't clear, military radios, and they heard 15 as 50. So we were about 50 feet off the ground. They threw this flare out behind us, and the pilot didn't know. He just knew to drop the aircraft. He just dropped straight down 50 feet. We bounced in the air. Our nose came up. Our stinger broke. I think it broke off. It was a little, like a plastic stinger, we called it. It would touch the ground before the tail rotor would. Well, that broke off, and our tail rotor dug into the ground. And, you could hear the engine, sound change, it slowed everything down. And they got on, and as we started to take off, the pilots started yelling, "Receiving fire." I don't know why they said it, because we couldn't shoot. He said, "Receiving fire, receiving fire." And both of our pilots were actually aircraft commanders. They were rated for flying at night, and both tried to fly us out of there. One wanted to go to the left, one wanted to go to the right. We kind of hovered there for a minute. Well, the guys in front of them were shooting right at the pilots. And then, we got out of there pretty safe. No, we didn't. Aircraft never got hit. I think the people shooting were blinded by the flares. And we got out of there pretty good. Nobody wounded. we picked up another group of LERPs. We worked with those guys a lot, and they were in contact, and their unit commander didn't believe them. They said, "Well, if you're in contact, bring me a body." So somebody had been, one of the guys attacking him, they'd shot him in the legs, or in the, where did they shoot him? They shot him in the stomach, and he kept coming. So they told me this afterwards. So they shot him through the legs. He couldn't walk anymore, but he could crawl. So one of them crawled out to him and took his weapons away from him, and rolled him on his back and put a grenade in his shirt. And then, went back to cover. And that killed him, but it almost ripped him in two. And he was the one they decided to bring on our aircraft. So, and they wouldn't even touch him. They were dragging him with a rope when we landed. And they got him on the aircraft pretty good. And we landed at we had to make another one of those running landings at the main airstrip. And the pilots got out, and our tail rotor was all right, so we could fly back to our little airstrip on the same base. They had gotten off and taken their evidence with them. And I'd been up for almost 3 days without any sleep. And I knew I had to, another hard day ahead of me. And the crew chief was saying, "Well, we're going to clean it up, before we go to bed." And I said, no, fuck that. We're not doing that. He said, just close up the doors when everybody else gets up. He said, "We're going to get up with them, and we'll clean it up then." So, one time they did something for us. They let us sleep. Instead of getting up, I needed 2 or 3 hours, a little bit of sleep. I slept till noon. And I suppose it smelled kind of like a car if you shot a deer and put it in there and left it in there for 12 hours in the sun. It was nasty. I didn't know what to do, so I went to the mess hall and I said, "I need a bucket and some scrub brushes and some good soap." So they gave me a couple of brushes and some lye soap, and we put up all the seats, and we started, because the guy he wasn't bleeding, but when an aircraft tipped when it tipped either way, blood would still come out of him. So it was all over the deck and under the pilot seats and in the chin bubbles, and it took a while to clean that mess up. It had that pink spray from scrubbing it, and it's hitting you in the face and mouth, and I don't know, just this some of the shittiest jobs you can imagine. It took us a long time, and I think there was still more. We kept finding more later, but we got most of it out and all of the smell out, Although we weren't a medevac unit, we got called out when medevac, for some reason, couldn't get in. Like they had no aircraft available, or nobody available nearby, for seriously wounded. We would do it. And we got called in one day. A flying crane had crashed, been shot down actually, and the pilot the crew chief had been badly wounded. And medevac got there first, and going in, somebody had shot the medic on there in the head. He was wearing a white helmet with a red cross on it, and they used that as a target. So they had to get out there, and so we were called in, and we were flying, waiting to get in. Matter of fact, we were on our long approach to go in, and they called us off. They said, "No, man, we don't need you anymore." And said, "You died down here." So we didn't have to go in there because right after that, a lot of us wore white flight helmets. That's just what they issued us. So they issued us a 1 gallon can of the Army olive drab paint to paint our helmets, but no paint brushes. So we had to paint them with a stick. Yeah, man, they didn't come out very pretty, but I can still see myself just taking a twig and trying to smear paint on there.